Welcome to our first NEC, and we're talking about clauses. Turn it on. No, doesn't want to go. Okay, so I'm Robert Gerard. I'm the NEC Users Group Secretary. I'm one of the NEC 4 drafters, and Peter Clayton, who's at St Masons. So you should find in the module that you're looking at the ability to ask, maybe if you have problems with the audio or something like that. So if you find at the other end of the web in London will help sort those things out. If you've got any questions of us to ask, if like a technical type questions, then please do send via the module, and we'll try and answer them as we're going through it and through the presentation. We have a section at the end of the presentation which is questions and answers, and any of those that we don't manage today, follow up with answers in due course. This webinar is being recorded and will be freely available on our NEC-contract.com in the coming week or two. Okay, so please do send your questions in. We'll try and answer that today. Any left over, and we'll answer it in the next week or so. Okay, so I think we've got all the attendees that we're going to get. So what we're going to cover today is a 1 hour webinar at 5 o'clock here, local time in Hong Kong. Look at what are Z clauses. Indeed, we're going to look at why they're needed. Some people argue that perhaps we should remove the opportunity or the option to add in Z clauses because it causes problems, but we'll have a discussion. Here, what did the Hong Kong government do about Z clauses? Some of the key things to consider when drafting them, what happens when they go wrong, not that yours will go wrong, if you do them, and then a Q&A session. The two contracts that we put on the screen there, NEC 4 engineering construction contract and the NEC 3 engineering and construction contract, it doesn't really matter. This discussion isn't really based on NEC 4 or NEC 3. The focus is engineering construction contracts. And talking about Z clauses in the context of a construction contract rather than a professional services contract, for example. Any questions you have, any Z clause to do with any of the NEC contracts, we'll happily have a go at that. Okay, so over to you, Peter.
Well, thanks very much, Rob, for the introduction, and good evening, everybody. Okay, well, to lead off, what are Z clauses? And for those of you that don't know or aren't familiar, as you can see on the slide there, hopefully what they are bespoke additional conditions of contract. So, in a way, the question, what are Z clauses? Parties and what they specifically drafted to go into the NEC contract, and they apply in addition to, they may amend the standard NEC core clauses, the standard NEC main option clauses, or X clauses as well. So they can have either of those functions, but they're generally thought of as being the additional conditions of contract. And really, it's very similar to the position on other standard forms of contract that people may be familiar with, where you will often see amendments, additional conditions, and so on, added on to those standard forms of contract. It's really the same concept here, but what I think NEC have done very well is that they've anticipated the fact that people will, for various reasons, seek to add to or amend the contracts, and they provide mechanisms to incorporate Z clauses and additions through the contract data. So if you turn to the contract data for NEC 4, there's a specific place where it will say that Z and additional conditions of contract are being used. They are as follows, and then optimistic tiny where you're supposed to write additional clauses, but of course in practice most parties are going to refer to a separate document containing them. And that's certainly the approach that the Hong Kong government does here. So
clearly identifiable set of changes to a standard document. That's the point.
Changes or additions.
Yeah. I sort of blow hot and cold on this myself. I quite like, sometimes it's scruffy, but it's very complicated. You have to look at two documents possibly.
Yes.
The contract itself and the Z clauses and fit them together to make them work. And I know sometimes a single contract with the Z clauses embedded in them.
Yep.
The trouble with that is that you're never too sure what is the standard, amending the amendment.
I think you always want that ability to see what's
separate
changed.
document.
Sometimes you can do it in other ways with a markup or something that indicates what's additional and what's not, and that would certainly be good practice, I think, to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, moving on then to the next question: why are Z clauses needed? Well, they are, I suppose, an important aspect of the flexibility of NEC. I mean, this is a general comment. NEC is sort of famous for having this, plain English approach, using short forms of clauses and so on, which I personally very much like. But sometimes the NEC achieves that brevity by leaving certain things to be worked out by the parties and provided for separately. So that's perhaps one reason why you sometimes need a few more clauses in a contract than you would otherwise have. And I suppose one example of that might be, say, if you need a more detailed mechanism for how design submissions are going to be done and reviewed and so on. If you have a contracted design element, that might be one example. But then other examples are that people may have unique requirements for the specific jurisdictions that they're working in. They may have specific issues for the particular procurers involved or the projects that they are dealing with. And I've given some examples there on the slide of things that you will often see, including in Hong Kong, provided for in clauses, so things relating to tax, employment, health and safety, specific local dispute resolution practices, which could be a particular procurer's favoured approach, or it could be something which reflects, say, a particular jurisdiction's security payment legislation on mandatory adjudication and things of that nature. And you may have bespoke commercial arrangements in your contract. NEC obviously provides a great deal of flexibility and choice already through options A to F, but sometimes parties might want to do something a little bit different. Maybe having a mix of fixed price and cost reimbursable or something like that. And then finally, of course, people will sometimes want to modify the risk balance as well. And finally, I think one thing that is quite interesting on the subject of Z clauses is if you're saying, well, why do people introduce them? If you actually look at what's been brought into NEC4 as additional features, quite a lot of the additions to NEC4 are things that were often provided through Z clauses. Yeah. And I guess, Rob, you know more about this than me, because you're involved in the production of NEC4, of course. But the things I'm thinking about are, for example, there are now provisions on anti-corruption and things of that nature in NEC4, which is an example of something which is sometimes dealt with through Z clauses. There is now the introduction of the final assessment procedure in NEC4, introduced sort of final account process that was not in NEC3. We've got some tiered dispute resolution provisions now, which again, you've seen the representatives. Yeah, and early contractor involvement, professional indemnity insurance, and information modelling. So these are things which NEC itself has recognised in the market are often dealt with by way of additional provisions and amendments. And as I understand it, the decision was to bring some of that into the standard form.
Yeah, it's one of the exercises was to look around, to look at commonly used clauses, as you mentioned, there's a balance to be struck, isn't there? You can't write what we could do. You can show 1,000 pages wrong. You can't deal with every eventuality in the contracts. And there are some things such as corruption, and most civilized societies have laws against corruption and say it's illegal to be corrupt. So the question is, why do I need a condition of the contract that mimics the law when the law already provides for that situation?
Yes.
But what we find is that clients are saying, but anti-corruption is really important to us, and we want positive management procedure or process or something in the contract because it is so important to us. Rather than 1,000 clients draft 1,000 different set clauses to deal with just corruption, in the end, and she said, well, let's give the world our thoughts or approach, a standard approach to being not corrupt and deal with the provisions if corruption is found in the contract. So it is to save the mass of different approaches that people take to common issues.
Yes.
So it's slightly changed the ethos of the contract. I think there are obviously more clauses now, more clauses dealing with the things that in the past. Then you see guys, well, we don't need to deal with assignments, we don't need to deal with
that's another great example. Actually, is the assignment
those sort of things. So I think it's just a recognition that if we don't do this, then the industry will do it, and that costs the industry a lot of time and money. Each time this is a clause, it could be anything. 1, 2, 3, 4 law firms get involved with reviewing it on behalf of different members of the supply chain. It's hard work, isn't it?
It is, and I think also, if NEC takes the lead on this, you get a clause which is properly crafted in the NEC style. It's shorter, and otherwise people will often give in to the temptation to, take something from a more traditional form and bolt it in, and then straight away you end up with a bit of a mismatch. I think, and a mismatch.
I smile because I think corruption is one of the things I always give the job to draft.
Yes.
It took me a few iterations, but in the end, it says something like the contractor does not do a corrupt act.
Well, that's exactly. Yes, it's.
Well, of course they don't.
Definitely.
We got it there.
Yeah, this is it. The contractor does not do a corrupt act. Full stop.
That's one of our finest moments, I think, to achieve.
Yeah.
Okay,
great. Well, what is the Hong Kong government's approach then to Z clauses? Well, they do the following with NEC at the moment. So, first of all, I say at the moment because obviously it's an evolving picture in Hong Kong, and things are going to be subject to change, I'm sure, in the future. But they do two things. First of all, they keep the amendments to the core clauses of NEC separate in a schedule of amendments, so they're not Z clauses as such. And then they have the Z clauses providing what are purely additional conditions of contract, which will apply. And fortunately, in Hong Kong, the Government Bureau here has taken a lead so that we have a standardised approach amongst the public works departments to how they procure NEC. That's not to say there's no variance and there can't be any departure, but there is some standard sets of amendments, standard sets of additional conditions, and an overarching practice note, which is an excellent document, and there's the picture of the front cover of it there on the slide, and the web address if you're not already familiar with it, which that guidance note, practice note, does a number of good things. I mean, first of all, it gives a lot of very good advice around NEC and how it works generally. And then secondly, it really explains the rationale behind certainly the government's approach to amendments and Z clauses, and also tendering and management of the contract. So it's kind of essential reading, I think, for anyone working or going to be working on NEC in Hong Kong. So that's just by way of overview and introduction.
So it's freely available on the net.
It is, yes. You can go and download the practice note itself, the standard suite of amendments, and Z clauses, as well as a lot of the standard tender templates and so on. And documents relating to the tender process. So it's a very, very useful resource.
Okay. But just to get that document at the moment is based upon NEC3 contracts.
On that link there, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that I'm aware of as yet, Hong Kong hasn't got an NEC4 contract running, so it'd be interesting to see with that document.
Yeah, and
NEC4 contract.
Right, and my understanding is there's 2 or 3, possibly more pilot projects identified for NEC4 now. So obviously there will have to be some amendments and changes to this material for the purposes of NEC4, and maybe that will be taken as an opportunity to do some more wide-ranging review and change. I don't know, but it'd be a good opportunity to do that anyway. Okay, so. Let's get our slide control back, right? Apologies, right. So we got the right slide now. So what else is there to comment on about the government's approach to Z clauses? Well, you can see on the slide there that I flagged out that the precedent clauses span 185 pages, and in fact, I thought this is my well thumbed copy here. It's quite a substantial document. Now, not every clause in here is going to apply to every NEC contract, because some only apply to certain options, some only apply in certain circumstances. But you know, the obvious point, and to put it in context, is that it's 185 pages, which is an awful lot of material. And on my counting of the pages in the latest NEC4, the standard NEC core clauses are only 28 pages. Yeah. And even if you add on all the X clauses, you'd only get up to about 50 pages. So there is an obvious mismatch in that. So it's a matter of impression. I think it does lead to people often saying in Hong Kong, well, actually these set clauses and amendments turn it back into a traditional public works contract, which I think is not quite fair. It's not quite right, in the sense that a lot of the core ethos of NEC is unaffected by the bulk of these provisions, because a lot of it does deal with that sort of stuff we were talking about before. It's the pages about competition and bribery, and about procurement practice and health and safety and so on, which it doesn't stop NEC being the forward-looking, incentive-driven contract that it is. Those types of things don't. There's a lot of bulk in them, and perhaps it's frustrating that they're so lengthy. But it doesn't change the overarching ethos of links and program management, and prospectively trying to agree compensation events and some of that really important stuff at NEC, or the target cost approach. They don't do too much damage to those, although I'll pick up 1 or 2 examples where perhaps they might. So I think it's a shame they're so long, but it's still a very different contract. Yeah,
and my understanding is they're optional anyway. I don't think are there any mandatory clauses, or they're just a shopping list?
Well, there is some scope for the individual works departments not to use them, or to seek to take different approaches, but it's a matter of internal practice and internal approvals being needed for some of them. So yeah, not everything is going to apply all the time.
And typically, without going through them in detail, I would imagine quite a few of them actually probably should come into the scope in NEC4 or works information.
Yes, they could do. Yeah, and that's a point we'll pick up on maybe a little bit later, because that certainly is possible. One other just to mention on the screen there at the bottom is dispute resolution. So there are really fairly traditional Hong Kong dispute resolution practices now that have been established for years, which are largely replicated, but with some changes and so on in these additional conditions. But typically in Hong Kong, the dispute resolution is mediation or adjudication on a sort of voluntary basis. It's not mandatory, followed ultimately by arbitration, and that's been very much carried through. We don't have statutory adjudication here like you have in the UK. For example, the NEC is largely geared in the UK to working with that statutory adjudication regime. But there have been some examples here where NEC contracts have been let with dispute resolution advisors involved, DRAs, to try and help facilitate settlements and avoidance of disputes. We've seen short form, relatively rapid arbitration procedures provided for. So there is some flexibility there to try different approaches. But it's a good example of how Hong Kong is really taking its sort of established practices with a few innovations and just bolting them in through the additional conditions and reserve clauses.
One thing, once you consider the next one, is wide clauses. So wide clauses in the contract with national legislation matters. So we have YK 1, 2 and 3 for using the UK written around, mainly around UK legislation. We also have YNZ 1 and 2 written around New Zealand legislation. There's an anticipation of the security payment legislation coming in at some point.
Yeah.
And then maybe we will have to write 1 or 2 wide clauses to make sure our contract fits here with the national jurisdiction.
Absolutely. I think that'll be essential. And yeah, of course, the question is when will we finally have the security payment legislation?
It took a few years now.
Yes.
You're the person.
Well, sort of. But I can't give any terribly accurate predictions as to exactly when that'll be here. I would hope that it won't be 10 or 30 years. So, mentioned in the policy address, Chief Executive's policy address last year, that it would be introduced during the course of this year, if my memory serves me correctly. But I think that's the start of the legislative process to get it brought into force rather than it actually coming into force this year.
It's difficult, isn't it? Legislation is intended to I think we met the UK similar legislation.
Yeah.
But even now in the UK, only a few weeks ago, I think, sort of question there on what do I think of that legislation. They're looking at changing it possibly. Yeah. So they find some things work, some things don't. I mean, even in the UK, we have mandatory adjudication for construction contracts. The courts now are pushing people towards mediation, believing that is a quicker, cheaper, better, approach sometimes. So there's lots of change going on in lots of jurisdictions, isn't there?
Yeah, and the model that Hong Kong has gone for is one that draws from different legislations around the world to come up with something unique for Hong Kong. So it'll be a little bit different again. But anyway, we'd better get back to NEC's clauses. Yes, so just now to talk about things to consider when drafting Z clauses. And there's a few pointers on them, and I'm grateful for the NEC's notes on preparing contract data, which has a little section on this. It's very good, and I've cribbed a fair bit from that, but added some of my own as well. And it's talking about things to consider. First of all, why is a clause needed? That's obviously got to be the first question. There should be good rationale, not just that, well, the last 10 contracts we did had one of these clauses in, therefore it must be essential. That's not necessarily the case, obviously. The next question is it necessary? Is it helpful? Is it fair? Which I think are all good questions. And is it necessary is often one of the most important ones, actually. And I'll give you an example from the government's suite of Z clauses at the moment. There's actually a year 2000 compliance clause in that, which I'm guessing no one in reality actually puts that one in the contracts, but it's still there as part of the suite. It could end up in
there's a fear.
That's not really needed.
There's a fear of not having it in. Yeah. And lo and behold, Y2K turn around and bites you on the bum.
That's right. So someone decides they're going to install a computer from 1995 into a project. Yeah. And then third one, how will it affect other provisions in the contract? And really, a lot of these points apply to amending any contract, frankly, not just NEC. But of course, as soon as you start tinkering with existing wording or putting new clauses in, you've got to ask yourself, well, what's the knock-on effect on other provisions? And I'll maybe give some examples of that a little later to put some flesh on the bones for that. Does it adversely affect the benefits and ethos of NEC? Now, what I had in mind with that was, NEC has some very specific you know, benefits and reasons why people use it in the first place. So obviously one could be to engender, you know, a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation. Very obviously.
Just snip that out.
Snip that out. Not a great idea.
Yeah.
Another one is obviously the whole way change is dealt with. You know, it's all
Yeah.
done on a prospective basis and so on and so forth. If your amendments start messing about with stuff like that, you really are cutting into the contract in a way that makes you think, well, why use it in the first place? You know, if you're going to do that. So again, we see some duplication on
No,
the
I
slide.
like that. I like that.
Just to reinforce the point.
Just, are you sure at this point, having thought about it a few times, you then say again, but why is this clause
Why is it
needed?
needed? Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. If we go down to, I think it's the second to the bottom of the screen. You know, is it drafted in the plain English style of NEC, and is it consistent with NEC language? Because I think one of the it's one of the common problems when you see amendments and additional conditions. They suddenly start using the more traditional style of contractual language, and that can give rise to its own issues, and suddenly you're adding length back into the contract, which NEC of course tries to avoid. And then the final point there, which I think was something you raised earlier, Rob, are you actually writing something into your terms and conditions that could be addressed in the works information? I mean, a particular concern about complying with some specific health and safety rules or procedures. You know, you could write that. It's a
constraint, isn't it?
It's a constraint on how you do the work. So why not consider putting that in the works information, or the scope as it's now called under NEC 4? And actually, there's quite a lot of the bulk of stuff can often be addressed in that way. Of course, it's still in there in the contract, so in a way you're not actually reducing the bulk of the terms and conditions. You're just putting them in a different place, but it's a more logical place for some of this stuff.
I would add another thing in there. Have I tested the logic of this? So we flowchart the contracts, and we flowchart the contracts very carefully to test that actually the logic of the contract works. You don't have any circles or fall off a cliff.
Yes.
So we've got particular Z clause. You do need it, you know, but as you drafted it, does it work? You know, does it actually achieve the goals that you set out to achieve for it in the first place? How many people actually do flowcharts to test their drafting of the Z clause?
Yes. Okay. Now, next thing, when our slides will move. Yeah, what happens when Z clauses go wrong? Well, the first thing we kind of mentioned a moment ago, of course, it can give rise to ambiguities and discrepancies. And I'll give an example of that from a case that was decided in the UK called RNE Npower and JN Bentley. And what happened in that case was it was a contract with sectional completion, and the relevant option X for sectional completion was used, and there was a description of the sections in that option. But then there was a different description in the works information, or a more expansive description in the works information. And so it's not exactly a point on Z clauses, but it's this sort of point that could occur, because you've got two competing definitions there. And suffice to say, one party was saying, well, the one in the option X should take priority, and that had a status contract, I think, from memories, which had a slightly more restrictive extent of works, and the works information had much more scope within it in the description of the sections there. And the point is, it just led to a dispute, and the court had to decide, and I think from memory it eventually resolved in favour of the employer and said it was the description, the longer description of the works information that applied. But it was just a classic case of some drafting being done in two different documents on an NEC contract, and it gave rise to an ambiguity and a dispute. And so it's just very important to take care when drafting for the contract. The destruction of the NEC ethos, we can pick that up on the last slide. But one amendment that you see quite often in the UK, and it's also used in Hong Kong, is to change the way that you value variations, which under NEC of course, is to say you look at the effect on cost, and then the contractor gets cost and their tendered fee on top, which is obviously all about trying to create a sort of a neutral entitlement where people aren't, held to under-tendered prices or high or low, exactly. And they get a pre-agreed profit and overhead on top. That is often amended so that actually you use rates and prices in the contract to value variations and change and so on, if they're applicable. And that's some people who may think, well, that's fine if that's what the parties want to do. Let them do it. They should be able to do it. But it's mandated through amendments, and to me that actually is cutting through one of the key aspects of NEC, and it's opening the door to all the arguments, about rates and how you adjust rates, and can the contractor escape from a terrible rate or benefit from having a really, really good rate. It's all about avoiding that. So other consequences: unfair risk allocation. Obviously, if you're just trying to make contract very onerous for somebody, you're no longer really partnering and sharing risks and managing risks. You're just trying to transfer it very, very heavily to one party, and of course that can just in turn lead to higher tender prices, and ultimately, certainly in my experience, in some ways, the more onerous contract, the more disputes you get, not the fewer. So those are some of the things.
That's interesting. Yeah. So, are you suggesting, therefore, where the contract terms are more equitable, fair, and reasonable, there are less disputes?
Well, I don't know. It's my anecdote.
If I was listening,
so it's not research or.
Okay, I was going to ask for the evidence.
I think certainly as a lawyer, people come and see you when they're losing money and they've got a really difficult contract, and they want you to find a way out of it and a way around the problem in the contract. Obviously, that's not going to happen if it's more balanced in the first place.
I usually advise be careful what you wish for, so that the set clauses will cause a certain behaviour on the contracts. That behaviour is often not conducive to getting the best out of the parties. Yeah. They cause conflicts, they cause defensiveness, they cause aggression, they cause conflict.
Yeah. So I've got a few examples now from the Hong Kong context of either amendments or additional Z clauses that I just thought I'd flag up, and it's perhaps a little cheeky to put these under the heading of what happens when Z clauses go wrong, because I'm not necessarily saying this is them going wrong. It's certainly, these are examples of things which I know causes concern in the market in Hong Kong. So the first one relates to the position on target contracts and is a very simple amendment made to the standard NEC core clause, which you see there. And under the target contract, the contractor is paid on an interim basis, effectively their costs plus a fee on top. And under the standard wording, which you can see on the screen there, if you ignore the amendments, the standard wording says the price for work done to date is the total of the defined costs which the project manager forecasts will have been paid by the contractor before the next assessment date plus the fee. So effectively, the contractor is being paid for the work ahead to the next assessment date. And therefore, they stay cash positive. They can claim the money before they spend it, and that they're not having to fund the works. And by that simple change shown there on the screen, that is turned around completely. The contractor is basically only entitled to what they've actually paid out.
It's cash negative.
It's cash negative.
It's actually NEC 2 basis, isn't it? Really?
Yeah,
that's how NEC 2 was written. NEC 3, you say cash positive, I think it's cash neutral. But
cash neutral is a better. Yeah. And to be fair, I've seen that amendment in the UK many times before as well. But it does have a negative impact on contractors. It may result in some contractors not even wanting to tender the work on this basis and so on. So it's potentially got quite a serious implication. Now, to be fair, I know they are starting to relax and look at ways of not being quite so rigid in this and actually paying some elements of the cost up front, certainly the contractor's own costs. I'm not sure if they've got that far yet though with the subcontractor cost, which is the real concern, of course, and where the big money is in the interim applications normally. And another aspect of target contracting, which is influenced by Z clauses, is in relation to the control of subcontracting. So although the contractor under a target contract has their target and is incentivised to work efficiently and deliver the project at lowest cost through the gain share mechanism, despite that, we do in Hong Kong have requirements for contractors when they're procuring subcontract works to go out to minimum numbers of subcontractors and run what on the face of it's quite a formalised tender process with the project manager having to approve the appointments and essentially requiring the contractor to go in each case for lowest price tender of subcontracts. There is, again, there is a little bit of flexibility around that, but as I understand it, not so much. And of course, that causes potential problems with delays to the works, delays then in turn to contractors getting paid for subcontract works and being able to earn their fee on that work. And of course, contractors often don't want to appoint the lowest price. They want to appoint the party they think is going to be best for the job and bring benefits in other ways. So I do think that's an example perhaps of a provision which maybe that's across some of the ethos NEC about just trusting people to get on and do the works in the best way, incentivised by the collaborative approach of the contract and the pain gain mechanism.
Yeah, it can cause conflicts. I mean, that's another. Yeah, all these things that have been stretched and tested and pushed and pulled can cause problems.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Some more examples. Well, this is just one that I pulled out about cost-saving design. So, standard NEC target contracts address the sharing of cost savings in effectively one paragraph, saying if the contractor comes up with a good idea that reduces the cost, you don't reduce the target, you leave it where it is, and then they can effectively get a share of any saving. And
it already says that in the contract.
Yes.
So it already says that in the amended NEC 3 contract.
If I'm reading it right, if I'm reading it correctly. But the Hong Kong government additional conditions have got 12 pages about cost-saving design with numerous provisions, most of which are sort of aimed at making the contractor liable for all and any aspects of their cost-saving design and any possible adverse consequences of them, and so on and so forth.
Scare them into.
So I think well, do you want to encourage people to do this stuff or not? So, and then the final point is, I mean, generally in Hong Kong, the additional conditions use quite traditional language. They've been brought over from the special conditions of contract that have applied on the traditional forms in use here, and they don't yet adopt the NEC drafting approach, and that's why there's 285 pages of them. That doesn't mean that they don't work, but it's a completely different style and language, and it would obviously be nice to see that aligned at some point. And then I think this is another interesting example, and it's an example of the importance of thinking through the consequences of amending one part of a contract on the other bits of the contract you're not amending. And it's an amendment that's made to schedules of cost components in NEC, which I'm sure many attending this webinar will know. The schedule of cost components is used to value the works on the target forms and also compensation events on other forms. And there is an amendment that's been used, I know, on some contracts where the contractor's management and supervisory staff are treated as included in the fee. So whereas normally you would claim the management and supervisory staff, the wages and salaries through the schedule,
pushed into the fee.
It's all pushed into the fee. Absolutely, and of course that that could work fine if a job goes entirely to plan and the contractor just tendered it into the fee and they recover it that way. But what it does mean is that the contractor is literally only going to get anything at all for their management and supervisory staff through the fee charged on their other costs, which of course is primarily subcontractor costs on most projects. So let's say that works fine in practice if the job goes to plan. But what if something happens? There's a compensation event, and let's assume it causes critical delay. It's going to keep
minimal extra costs, possibly.
Exactly. So as I got on the slide here, you could have a significant delay, which is going to keep the site management staff on there for whatever months or whatever it may be. And fine, if the subcontractors are all delayed, or the reason for the compensation event is some huge variation with lots of extra work being done, then it may be that the extra fee on that extra cost is going to cover those management and supervisory costs. It might even give the contractor a bonus. It might give them a windfall. But of course, if there's no work, let's just say work on site is stopped for some reason, there's no cost being incurred. Maybe the key subcontractors aren't even brought to site. So the contractor's not going to make any recovery through the fee. And inevitably that's exactly the sort of thing that could cause a dispute and could cause people to go up to lawyers and say, well, can you come up with some clever arguments as to why we do get paid out management supervisory.
So in fairness, all of these might have been added in for good reasons. But they have a consequence. There is a consequence. It affects behaviour, could cause a dispute to arise.
Yes.
Worries me is it has an unintended consequence.
That's right.
Something happens that you never ever dreamed might have happened, like
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, just got a few more minutes on this, and we need to look at,
Well, I think we're
just about it.
Just about it. Yeah. In fact, this is the final slide. It's perfect. How could Hong Kong Z clauses be improved? Well, I probably already answered this as we've gone through, but I think first point is really a need to refine the amendments to the NEC language. As I mentioned, that's a great way to reduce the bulk of them and make them a lot more user friendly. I think with the NEC contract, I think also this is what we made. See which of them can be perhaps moved into words
more appropriate for someone else.
Yeah. Or the scope in NEC4. See what's unnecessary. Again, I gave the silly example of the year 2000 clause, but that can be ditched. And see also what's now covered by the new provisions in NEC4. Can procurers here get comfortable with that? Your very short, elegant clause compared to the more expansive clauses that we see at the moment in the Z clauses. And I think just generally some of those examples I've just given, do we really need them? Can we place greater trust in the project manager and contractor to just get on and allow the job to be procured appropriately?
Exceptional people
to rely on them.
And ethics up to here.
Exactly. And contractors are incentivised, aren't they, to manage the works well, to not be wasteful.
Why would they not? That's a discussion I have quite frequently. Why would a contractor deliberately set out to cause failure or to fail? That's just a crazy concept. Exactly. It's unsustainable. They'll be out of business before you know it. Things do go wrong, but generally it's not deliberate. Mistakes may be made, but it's not a deliberate policy to cause a problem and lose money on the contract.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so
and I suppose just the final thought is just if we are obviously moving to pilots on NEC4, what a great opportunity to dust this all down and rationalise some of it.
So let's have a look. I'm interrupted with other questions at the moment. Let's see what we've got. Thank you very much. That's a great first question, so I enjoy that. Right. If you want to include a requirement which covers intellectual property rights, which is better, a Z clause or putting the requirement within the works information? So how about this? Some free legal advice here. So
I think personally, if there's something like that, I probably would go for the.
So there's a difference, isn't there, on there's a different weighting given to a condition of contracts. I presume that's right.
Well, it depends.
wording.
I mean, I think the contracts will always, you read a contract together and when you try and interpret it. But notwithstanding that, there are some important differences between, say, the conditions of contract and the works information. I mean, one of them is that the works information can be changed by the project manager. There can be a variation to change the works information or the scope effectively. And many employers will say, well, I don't want anyone to have the freedom or flexibility to do that if something's important, and clearly transferring an intellectual property right or whatever, or protecting it is important. I think that probably does merit inclusion in an additional condition, but I mean, others may have a different view, and you could put it elsewhere. But I'm not sure what the big benefit is putting that in the works information.
If it's in now, okay. If it's in the works information, then it's a requirement of the contract to provide the works in accordance with the works information and do whatever the works information or the scope tells you to do. So it is part of the contract.
It's in there. It's in there.
It's in there.
But I don't see a particular need to say, well, that shouldn't be in the additional conditions.
No. Yeah, and I wouldn't be protectionist here. I mean, deliberately, Z clause it's a second option, so people could and should be able to amend the conditions contract as they see fit to suit their particular purposes.
Yes. And there is some limited stuff already, I think, in the core clauses about IP, isn't there?
Yes.
So it's,
certainly for the professional service sort of contracts. Okay. So there was a question about the webinar being available later on. Yes, it will be in a week or so. Lots of comments about audio. We tried using Wi-Fi. We didn't have a fixed line, so we'll maybe see how it goes. Hi, Rob. That's not much of a question. Audio is not good. Not many questions, to be honest. Which means I'll have to ask Peter lots of questions.
far away. Poor connection. Yeah.
Right. So earlier on in the slides, it states that the clause is usually prepared by the employer or the client, but can it be issued amended by other parties?
Oh, well, that's a very good point, and I meant to say something about that and didn't, which is simply that, yeah, it's complete sort of freedom of contract in a sense. So if parties want to agree a particular Z clause, they can put it in their contract. But of course, in the real world, and certainly in Hong Kong, it tends to be the employers that come up with the proposed additional conditions, and they go out to tender on those. And certainly here, there's very little flexibility to, propose different contract terms and conditions and substantially renegotiate them if any flexibility at all. So it's not common to see certainly any significant Z clauses negotiated and included in a contract in Hong Kong, I think, at the moment.
That's a shame.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying it never happens or couldn't happen.
So bid or don't bid, is that that's
well,
some line always.
There are limits around the extent to which you can qualify tenders and provide different approaches. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not a common practice. It may be more common in the UK, perhaps. But to answer the question, yeah, the Z clause could come from anybody from anywhere, and provided it's agreed, it can go in the contract.
Yeah. And it makes a shame the notice, perhaps it's a shame that there isn't the facility to offer alternatives. I mean, I'd like to see Z clauses costed, to be honest. I would like, almost schedule say, well, Z1 means that I've added $1 million to the lump sum of the target cost, and Z2 means that I've added $500,000.
Yeah.
Do people truly appreciate the cost of risk transfer from one party to the other?
Absolutely.
And Z3, I have no idea what it's on about. It's so confusing. I've thrown in $250 million just in case, because I have literally no idea.
Yes.
So there's an interesting one. Good question. So the Hong Kong contract is under transition from traditional contracts to NEC, and teething problems inevitable. I think it's a great point. So what can Hong Kong government learn from the UK's transition from traditional contracts to NEC. So the point is that if you have a really traditional way of working, and then suddenly you leap to this brand new set of terms and conditions which are wildly different from that which you had before, and sometimes that can be considered to be a step too far. So maybe in that transition, hence the raft of government potential state clauses. But they've used the contract now for a good few years, so maybe it's time to reflect to say, maybe we can make that leap to using the contract more in its native state rather than with Z clauses, which is what you said earlier. Really.
And I think also if you look at the UK experience, when I used to work in the UK doing NEC contracts and disputes for quite a few years before I came to Hong Kong, so I saw some of this transition happening there, and I saw some of the issues and disputes that arose. And you can also now in the UK see a growing body of case law where NEC contracts and disputes on them have ended up in the courts. Now, it's quite interesting when you look at those cases to see what's caused the disputes, and often you can trace the disputes back to core amendments and so on, just failures to operate the contract correctly because people are still trying to treat it like a traditional form. And I think the lessons to learn are that it is quite a big transition, and you have to invest time in operating the contract properly and as intended, and making sure that people on both sides of the contract are empowered to do what needs to be done and understand what they've got to do. And it's not easy, and there will be disputes, there will be problems I've made out on NEC contracts in Hong Kong at some point, and it won't mean that it's been a failure or problem. It is as the question says. I mean, it is inevitable that it's going to happen at some point.
Next question, come back to that one, but is there any court case involved in using the NEC contract? So the answer yes.
There's many.
That's the UK.
That's the UK.
Oh,
and I do separate presentations from time to time on those cases, and it is a growing trickle of case law. And also, you see in the UK another sort of case, which is enforcement of adjudicators' decisions. So it's not gone to court for the substantive dispute to be decided. It's gone to an adjudicator, and then someone is just going to court to get an order enforcing payment of that adjudicator's decision. So the court doesn't decide the merits or the issues on the NEC contract, but you just see that there's been an adjudication and there's been an enforcement on an NEC contract. So you can see
it's not really anything to do in this world to NEC. It doesn't matter what
it's not really what the contracts. It's not really necessarily to do with the usual things that cause disputes a lot. Money primarily, of course. So
but to answer the question specifically, is there any NEC court cases in Hong Kong as yet?
No, certainly not that I'm aware of. And of course we have the problem, not problem, but we have the issue here that invariably on government projects, the final dispute tribunal is arbitration.
I was just going to say, you mentioned that earlier.
You're not going to see if and when they come, decided cases on NEC in Hong Kong, except in relatively rare situations where people can perhaps appeal an arbitrator's award or something of that nature.
That's unlikely. So arbitration is private. So we won't learn in adjudication or arbitration where people go wrong, basically, which we don't have in the UK, where one of the problems I have personally with adjudication is that it's private. There are lots of things that we could learn from where people go wrong to make sure that people don't make the same mistake, and we're denied from learning from that. So we'd love us to neutralise somehow these processes that we learn the mistakes.
That's interesting. In Singapore, adjudicators' decisions are published but anonymised, so everyone can see.
And I'd rather have that. So it's party A and party B or something like that.
Yes.
So party A gives party B some money, and that's it.
I imagine they can work out who the parties are. Details after time, but that's another.
I would love to see that. So that we denied that sort of benefit.
Yes.
Any other questions? There's one about how procurement practice is involved in NEC. I'm not sure, to be honest, what the question is there. What do you think? What is the question?
Well, I think what they're asking is that we do have some quite rigid sort of procurement rules and procedures, certainly affecting the public works, and they do have a bearing. I mean, if you read that practice note that we showed at the start of the presentation, that the government's prepared here, I mean, there's quite a lot in there about the procurement processes, how tenders are assessed and all this kind of thing. And also maybe it's not procurement practice as such, but a lot of the Z clauses to do with, the requirements to tender, the subcontractors on target contracts, the, cash negative amendments to target contracts, and even the example of the management and supervisory staff being included in the fee, and a lot of that is driven around concerns of the ICAC, the Independent Commission Against Corruption, and subordinate concerns, where there is a desire to make things either more transparent or to limit the ability of people to incur costs at their own discretion, if you like. So it does influence. I think these things do influence the way it's handled in court.
Okay, right. So Savannah in London will now actually be shaking her head, telling me we need to conclude this up about a minute and a half to wrap things up. Just say that Letty Ma has joined the team here in Hong Kong on his full-time base. So there'll be, I think there's an announcement on LinkedIn. So look out for that, and do speak with Letty for all your matters concerning NEC. So something about Pins and Masons. Lots of things about Pins and Masons. You're there, lot.
Oh yes.
Hong Kong, amongst other places. Yes. So just a thank you really to Pinsons for a very fabulous office. 50 flights of stairs to walk down there. Yeah. Thankfully that was very fast lift.
So thank you. Thank you for asking me along to give the presentation.
No problem at all. So there's an NEC Users Group briefing on the 7th of February, 8 o'clock to 9:30, talking about the pillars of NEC collaboration, how to promote and achieve successful collaborative outcomes. Have a look at the website, neccontract.com events. I look forward to seeing some of you there at that one. The next lot of ECC project manager accreditation. Accreditation is still extremely popular here. Next dates are the 9th of April and the 7th of May. I think the course is running until next week. We've got already full. So have a look at the next ones. On Thursday, I'm doing a project manager accreditation extension, NEC 3 to 4. That's really full. Next date, 4th of May. So again, have a look at the website for that. And there's our contact details. So contact us with any questions that you've got. We hope that you have enjoyed this session. And as I say, just to repeat, we will put this on YouTube and through neccontract.com, so you'll be able to come back into this if you'd like to in the future. So that just leaves me to say thank you to Peter, thank you for Peter Mason. Thank you all for attending, thank you for your questions, and we'll see you at a future event. Thank you and goodbye.